The shot cracked the noon heat clean in half. Kane's Colt kicked once, a spit of white smoke torn away by wind, and the dog folded on the packed dirt like a cut rope. A single yelp, then only the metallic rattle of the bell over the mercantile door, swaying from the concussion. Dust drifted. A tin plate clattered somewhere. Then silence, the kind that makes men hear their own breath. Sheriff Kane lowered the pistol, but did not holster it. The pearl grip gleamed against his scarred hand. He watched the animal's ribs. No rise, no fall. Flies already found the blood matting its gray coat. The square, ringed by the jailhouse livery and saloon, held its breath. Women froze with baskets on their hips. A child's marble halted at the edge of a boot heel and didn't dare roll farther. "Jesus, Sheriff," Rafe Mercer said, voice gone raw. "You shot my dog." Mercer's shoulders were broad and sunburnt, his fists scarred from rope and wire. He kept taking one step and stopping, as if an invisible rope held him back. Old Mudge never hurt a soul. Kane's steel-gray eyes didn't blink. Wind tugged the brim of his black hat and lifted the tails of his dust-worn duster. He had the stillness of a man deciding which direction death might arrive from. "Back up, all of you," he said, voice even. "Don't touch him." "Don't you give orders after that," Mercer spat. "You got no call, Sheriff." Someone whispered, "That dog slept under the church steps." Someone else said, "He was wagging his tail." A woman hissed, "Murderer," quick and thin. The sound skittered across the square like a dry leaf. Kane stepped forward, boot heel careful, and crouched beside the body. The dog's gums were white and blistered. Its eyes filmed to marble. At the throat under the collar, something dark had scuffed the fur raw. A smear like tar, faint and sweet, wrong as candy in a graveyard. Kane reached for the leather, not to comfort the dead thing, but to see the knot he'd glimpsed before he fired. A crude twist of gut line. A hitch meant to hold something tight, to hide it from anyone who didn't look close. He didn't touch the knot. Not yet. Rafe Mercer lurched another half step, only to be checked by Kane's voice, flat as a canyon wall. "I said don't move, Rafe." "Or what? You'll shoot me like a cur?" Rafe's boy, Tommy, pushed from the shade of the mercantile, 10 or 11 at most, dust to the knees. The boy's eyes had the red shine of someone about to hate the world. "Mudge never even growled, Sheriff. He was wagging at you. He knew you." Kane looked at the boy, and something in his face flinched and was gone. A memory, burned and buried, stirred like a coal under ash. He slid his badge from his breast, silver, scuffed, let it spin once between forefinger and thumb, then pinned it back down where the town could see it live and bright over his heart. Doc Avery shouldered through the ring of townsfolk, white mustache bristling. "Step aside." He knelt, sniffed, and grimaced. Mouths scorched. Froth went sour. If it ain't rabies, it's kin to it. He looked up at Kane, eyes narrowing. "You smell that?" Kane did. Beneath blood and dust, almond and coal oil, the ghost of it. He tipped the collar, just enough to show the edge of oilskin tucked tight against the fur. The town didn't see. Doc did. His jaw tightened, a breath only, then both men looked away like strangers. The jailhouse door across the square creaked as it took the light, bars casting a lattice of shadows that lay over the dead dog like iron. The gallows beyond the courthouse ridge, unused in months, creaked too, a tired rope swaying in a wind that had found its voice again. Law had its symbols, Kane felt them press against his shoulders like hands. "Sheriff," Mayor Ellis Boone called, pushing his hat back with a thumb slick with sweat. His voice shook the way a fence shakes before it breaks. "Best you explain yourself, and quick. Folks got nerves. I got a town to keep from boiling over." Kane rose. He holstered the Colt with a slow, deliberate motion that made no one relax. He wasn't a man who apologized to a crowd. He wasn't a man who pleaded, either. "Dog was sick," he said, "and carrying something worse. Everybody back away. Give Doc space and fetch me a clean sack and a shovel." Rafe Mercer's laugh came out like a bark. "Sick. You saw him lick Tommy's hand just yesterday. Some sickness, that is." Kane said nothing to that. He studied the people instead, weighing faces. The bartender clutching his apron like a shield. The school marm with lips pressed thin enough to cut. The drifter with a finger laid too casual along the barrel of his carbine. Eyes can be hammers or nails. Today, most were hammers. At his boots, a fly slipped and buzzed over the dog's lip. The froth there glittered like crystal. Kane saw a sliver wink. A hair-thin edge of glass or varnished paper, wet and tucked deep. He shifted, blocking the view, and let his duster fall like curtain. When he came up, his right fist closed around a small, sticky weight he did not show. Murmurs rose. "Why won't he let us see? Did he take something? What's he hiding?" "Sheriff," Doc Avery said softly, so only Kane could hear. "That scent's cyanide, kin. Powdered seeds, maybe. You cut this open, and the dust'll ride the wind." "I won't cut it," Kane said, equally soft. Doc's eyes flicked to the boy, then the sun, then the rope shadow leaning from the jail like a prophecy. "You got a long afternoon." Boot heels clicked to Kane's left, the neat practiced rhythm of authority that didn't earn respect, so it walked like it deserved it. Deputy Harlan Briggs stepped out from under the saloon awning, the star on his vest catching light, like a wink he didn't deserve. He chewed lazily and spat with care that felt like insult. "Well now," Briggs drawled, looking the dog over like a poker pot. "Lawman shoots a friendly mutt dead noon in the square. Ain't that a picture for the territorial paper? Bad sheriff, worse aim." He snorted at his own joke, but his eyes stayed cold. "You figured you're above explaining, or you expect us all to just nod, 'cause you like polishing that pearl-handled peacemaker?" "Not now," Kane said. "Not now," Briggs repeated, louder for the crowd. "Hear that? Not now. He'll tell us when we're allowed to be upset. That it, Sheriff?" Rafe's jaw bunched. "You hear him, boys? He gives himself permission for killing and tells us to mind our manners." Kane's temper, chained and mean, shifted in its sleep. He breathed through dust and heat and the far-off rattle of a freight wagon hitting a rut. "Rafe," he said low, "I'll talk, but you'll listen without froth. Your dog was turned into a mule for poison. The knot under his collar held a packet. Somebody sent him into town, maybe toward the water trough, maybe toward the livery. A jump to a child and a bite would have carried it on. I won't let that start." A woman gasped. Tommy's chin lifted, uncertain, hope warring with fresh hatred. "Fine story," Briggs said, grinning wide enough to show a gold tooth he hadn't paid for honest. "Packet, poison, secret knots. Why don't you show us this made-up evidence, Sheriff? I'd like to see the fairy tale." Kane didn't move. The small oilskin bundle in his palm seemed to throb with the crowd's pulse. He had two choices, and both reached for his throat. Show the packet, risk the dust riding the wind into lungs and eyes, hide it, and feed a fire that might burn him out of office by sundown. Law said, Present evidence. Justice said, keep poison sealed and safe. He'd walked that fork his whole life. He looked at Tommy again. The boy's hands were fists, nails bitten raw. Kane saw another boy for a breath and wanted to break. He didn't. Mayor Boone dabbed his forehead. Sheriff, we have to keep order. Folks They need a man to stand in front of a bad wind, Kane said. He lifted his voice so everyone could hear it, the words clean and unadorned, made of fence posts and hard ground. Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me. You'll get answers. First we keep you breathing. The sentence moved through the crowd like the first cold drop before storm. Heads tipped. A few men drew back an inch, like they'd been closer to the edge than they knew. Others leaned in, hungry for a fall. Enough, Rafe rasped. Tears stood hot in his eyes and didn't fall. You put my dog in the ground, and you talk like preacher. You ain't burying him like trash. I'll see him buried proper, Kane said, over my dead. The church bell cut him, a single startled clang, not for service but because wind slung it. In its echo a cattle load drifted from the south road, wrong and strained. Kane's head turned. Heat wavered over the emptiness beyond the livery, and in that shimmer rode 3 men he'd never seen before. Hats low, faces rag-wrapped against dust, though the day was calm, saddlebags slung heavy. The middle one wore a dark coat, despite the heat. He looked at the square like a buyer at a stock pen. Briggs saw them too, and smiled, quick and mean. "Company," he said. Kane slid the oilskin into the inside pocket of his duster, and finally, reluctantly, drew his Colt again, not to threaten, but because the air had changed shape and required it. He stepped away from the dog. The square breathed in, held it. Behind him, metal clicked like a nail sealing a coffin. "Sheriff Kane," Harlan Briggs said, voice pleasant as fresh-cut hay. "Lay your gun on the ground. I'm placing you under arrest for cruelty and murder." The square blinked. Even the flies seemed to stop. Kane did not turn. He could feel the deputy's revolver aimed between his shoulders like a cool coin pressed to skin. He lifted his chin toward the 3 riders easing closer, toward Rafe's boy whose breath was hitching, toward the jail that threw bars across the dust, like a shadow of what waited. "On what authority?" Kane asked, without looking back. Briggs cocked the hammer. The sound carried to the last porch. "On mine." Kane didn't turn. He kept his eyes on the 3 riders easing out of the heat shimmer and said, so the whole square could hear, "You pull that trigger at my back, Briggs, and you'll be hanging a sheriff in front of the gallows that bears your own name." The words traveled like a whip crack. The deputy's chuckle came soft and mean anyway, and cold iron kissed Kane's wrists, shackles, a symbol and a sentence. The crowd let out the breath it had been holding. "Stand aside," Briggs called, loud for the porches. "By law and my authority, Sheriff Kane's under arrest." "By whose authority?" Mayor Boone tried again, voice cracking, but his hat was already in his hands like a man at a funeral. The bars of the jailhouse window striped the dust like tiger shadows. Kane felt the deputy's tug and took 1 step forward, then another, slow and steady, as if the ground might break. Tommy Mercer made a sound that broke something smaller. "He shot Mudge, Pa." Rafe Mercer's face looked carved from a salt lick. "We'll have our say," he told the boy, but the words came out shaped like revenge. From the bakery door, a whisper started. By the mercantile, it was a murmur. By the saloon, it had a name. "Mad Dog." "No," another voice said, eager to be first with a better story. "Not rabid, mean. Dog bared teeth at him. He liked that dog, someone objected, offended on behalf of the dead. Kane don't shoot for sport. Oh, you think you know him? I saw blood on its mouth. Blood means rabies. Blood means somebody hurt it. He hurt it. Hush, Doc Avery's bending over it right now. He's hiding something under the collar, I saw. Hiding what? Poison. Poison? Lord help us. Poison where? The rumor found legs and ran. Briggs marched Kane across the square like a prize mule, the iron bit of the shackles biting as they went. 2 steps behind, Doc Avery crouched over Mudge, with a kerchief tied at his nose, his fingers gentled by years of knowing where to press and where not to. He used the point of his scissors instead of a knife, prying at the knot under the collar with the care men reserve for nitroglycerin. "Hannah," he told his assistant, "fetch me the big glass jar. Vinegar, too. Don't breathe close." "Is it the sickness?" she whispered. "It's a kind that don't give warnings," Doc answered, voice so low the wind could have claimed it. He glanced toward Kane, caught his eye, and Kane saw the message. "I know." Then the jar's mouth took the oilskin packet like a mouth swallowing sin, and Doc sealed it with trembling hands. Inside the jail, the cells carried cool like a well. Briggs shoved Kane into the first and kept the keys so visible on his belt they were practically jewelry. "You can sit a spell," he said, smirking. "Let the town cool off." Kane sat on the bunk. The silver badge on his chest felt heavy and wrong. He spun it once, watched light skitter over the tarnish. Outside, a door banged. The square began to talk properly now, in clumps and corners. He could hear the shapes of it, the way words changed size when fear put its thumb on the scale. At the saloon, a new voice joined that talk. The man in the dark coat had ridden slow in with his 2 shadows, and now leaned his elbows on the plank bar like a friend of the house. "Shame," he told the room, buying a round he didn't need. "Hate to see a dog die. In my country, we got a way of dealing with rabies. Rope." He let the word dangle. You let it spread, and soon enough you're burying children. Sheriff had a choice. Guess he chose quick. "You see it?" the bartender asked, eager and wary both. "Saw the froth," Darkcoat lied, and it became truth in 4 ears before he finished his glass. "Saw that mutt lick a trough. Ask yourselves what's floating there right now." At the church steps, Sister Ameline gathered skirts and children. "Stay clear of the water until evening," she told mothers who valued her more than the mayor. "Boil what you draw." At the blacksmith, a young smith's helper told it different to a teamster. "He shot that dog 'cause it spooked his horse last week. Always had a temper, Sheriff did." The teamster nodded and made himself the man who'd known it all along. Always said it'd be him or us one day. At the abandoned courthouse, 3 boys dared each other to jump off the back stair, then looked up at the gallows ridge and fell quiet because even boys can feel a rope's opinion. One spat and said, "They'll be hanging by sundown," high on the thrill of guessing the worst. The other 2 nodded, because boys don't like being lonelier than they already are. Mayor Boone knocked his gavel against air outside the livery like it could hammer order into dust. "Town meeting at 4 at the hall," he called. "We'll hear from me first." Briggs interrupted before the crowd could imagine another chair to sit in. He stood on the hotel steps like a circuit judge, thumb hooked in his belt, star bright. "Dog's dead, and that's a fact. Maybe there's more facts to come. Maybe not. But we got a sick animal bled right here where our children play. A man that loves the town don't keep secrets. Our sheriff loves his own way." "You aim to try him before he speaks?" a rancher asked. Briggs smiled. Man can speak from a cell as easy as a doorstep. Safer, too. Back of the jail, a shadow crossed the small window that let heat and rumor through the bars. Doc Avery pressed close to it. "Kane," he hissed, "you still got the bundle?" Kane shook his head once. "You mean this?" Briggs drawled from the doorway, and something inside Kane dropped. The deputy held up the oilskin packet between thumb and forefinger, grinning like a boy with a beetle. He'd taken it while he'd patted Kane for weapons. Of course he had. Of course the devil smirks when you hand him matches. "Don't break that seal," Kane said, so calm a man could mistake it for surrender. "Smell of almonds means death." Briggs sniffed it anyway, flinched back, then covered with a laugh. "You hear him? Stories now. You should write 'em down, Sheriff. Folks like a yarn." But he set it on the desk gingerly, as if his bones believed what his mouth did not. "Let me lock it," Doc said. "Strong jar, out of the sun." Briggs glanced from Kane to the window, where Hannah's silhouette hovered like a second conscience. He wanted to do the wrong thing. His whole bearing was made of it. But he wanted to be seen doing right, too. He could read a crowd. "Fine," he said at last. "Doc holds it. But if this turns out to be hogwash, the hog's got your hat on." Kane watched the vinegar-smudged glass swallow the packet. He'd made a choice in that moment, to warn a man he might need to bury later, to hand the truth to a neighbor who might not deserve it. Irreversible? Maybe. But he could swallow regret better than poison in a high wind. Word galloped ahead of facts all the same. At the livery, the stable boy dipped a bucket and paused because Sister Emmeline's warning had made its way even into a skull still soft in places. One of Dark Coat's shadows loomed up, smiling. "Here," the stranger said, too kindly by half. "Use ours." He poured from a skin that smelled wrong to a nose that had never learned to doubt, and the boy let his horse drink because horses do not understand malice until it wears spurs. By late afternoon, the heat pressed like a wet hand. Inside the cell, Kane listened to the town he'd kept safer than it knew. He heard men tug rope off a hook and test it. He heard the mayor practicing sentences in which no one bled. He heard a child laugh where children always laughed, as if the world was not a thin furnace wall you could crack with one hard knock. Rafe Mercer came to the bars and put both hands on iron. Kane stood. They faced each other the way two old trees face weather. "You got a story for me?" Rafe asked, in a voice rubbed raw by grief. "One that makes shooting my dog a kind thing?" "I got a truth," Kane said. He carried a packet tied under his collar. "Meant for the trough, for the cattle, maybe for your boy's hands." He let that last hang. It landed. Rafe's jaw worked like a millstone. "You could have said that sooner. Could have killed half the square opening it to show you," Kane answered. "There's a difference between saying and saving, Rafe." Easy to say from behind bars. Rafe leaned in until breath met breath. Easier still from behind a noose. "Folks are meeting now. They'll want a voice, maybe mine." Kane didn't look away, then use it like a man who wants his boy to grow old. When Rafe left, he left the air trembling. Kane sat. He could feel the town shifting under him like a horse about to bolt. He could smell almonds where there were none. The first scream came from the livery. It tore clean through the afternoon and left silence in its wake like a fresh-cut scar. The next sound was the crash of a bucket and a horse, coughing wet and terrible. Then Hannah's voice, high, "Doc," and boots, so many boots. Briggs sprinted past the cell with the keys rattling, and for once he forgot to smirk. Kane rose, Hands at the bars. Out the window he saw it. The gelding in the yard rearing once, then collapsing to its knees, white froth stringing from its lips. People scattered, as if disease had grown legs. The water trough glinted under sun like an innocent thing. Heads turned, and 100 eyes found the jail. "This is what comes of secrets," someone shouted, already certain of the ending. "He brought it here." Another voice, higher and nearer hate. "Hang him now before the whole town dies." Doc Avery ran into view with his jar, barking order like a general who'd learned medicine fighting men's worst idea of themselves. "No one touch the water. Get me lime. Rags. Move." On the desk beside Kane's cell, where Briggs had set it, the glass jar that held the oilskin packet sat sweating in the heat. The sheriff's silver badge glimmered on his chest with every breath. Outside, Rafe Mercer stepped into the open with a length of rope in both fists. And across the street, the man in the dark coat smiled once, small and satisfied, as if a match finally took to kindling. The square held its breath again. Then Tommy Mercer, because boys move toward noise the way moths move toward flame, stumbled out of the crowd toward the livery, hand stretched to the trough's edge. "Tommy," Kane roared, the word blasting off stone. The boy's fingers brushed water, and the town gasped as one. Before the world shattered into motion, dust drifted in the square like ash after a fire. Blood, the dogs, had dried to a brown comet on the planks where Kane's boot still rested. He didn't move. He let the town glare at his back, as if their hatred could burn through duster and bone. His silver badge spun lazily between thumb and forefinger, catching pale sun, flashing like a warning lantern. Then he pocketed it and knelt. He pried open the stiff jaw with his pocket knife. The crowd hissed. Someone threw a kernel of corn. It tapped his hat and skittered away. Kane didn't look up. Inside the dog's mouth, beneath the torn tongue, a smear of black clung to the palate. Not blood. Pitch. He scraped and lifted a crusted fleck to his nose. Sulfur and lamp black rode up like a punch, powder paste. He stood and finally faced them. The square bristled, women clutching shawls, men with fists jammed into belts to keep their hands from doing worse. A little girl cried and buried her face in her mother's waist. Kane's gaze found the gallows beyond. The town's ugly scaffold, throwing a skeletal shadow across the dirt. Below it, a trapdoor newly planed, and under that, if he was right, something no sermon could redeem. "Sheriff," a rancher spat, "you shot a child's dog like it was a rabid coyote." Kane let the accusation hang. The wind lifted a paper flyer from the jail door, "Territorial hearing, noon tomorrow," and slapped it against a hitch rail. His eye tracked the motion the way a hunter tracks brush for cougars. No time to explain. Explain too soon, and you tipped your hand to the men who needed your silence to live. He turned and shouldered through to the jail. Inside, the air was cool, stone damp. He laid the dog on Doc Albright's steel table and struck a match. The sulfur flare painted the room the color of fever. "Don't clean it," he said. "Carve it." Doc Albright, a thin man with a steady razor, lifted a brow. "You planning to stand for re-election after this?" "Open the jowls." Kane's voice fell to a gravel whisper. "Look for wire." The razor whispered. Albright paused, then exhaled a soft, sick sound. He lifted a short loop of copper, charred and kinked, from inside the cheek. A tiny iron claw clung to the wire like a tick, teeth still biting down on a nub pale as chalk. "Phosphor," Kane said. "Friction primer." Someone meant that dog to bite a line and light it. For what? Albright's voice thinned. Powder. Kane pointed through the barred window toward the gallows. Set under the platform, one tug on a tarred fuse, and we'd have splinters and saints flying together. Doc knuckled the bridge of his nose. Christ. Sheriff, why not tell them? Kane stared at the flame guttering on the match. Because the men who rigged this are listening for what I know. If they hear it too soon, they move the boy. What boy? He blew the match and smoke curled like a question. The dog's owner. A knuckle rapped the jail door, slow, polite. Kane's hand settled on his Colt. He opened to find a figure in a poncho the color of storms, a patchy girl, hair braided, eyes steady as river stones. He knew her from the periphery of his last week, watching, always with a bundle of herbs she never seemed to sell. You saw something, Kane said. She nodded once. Sora, she said, tapping her chest. I saw your bullet. I saw the white man with the jar days before. Where? At the old courthouse with no roof. He walked with a limp and the law on his hip. Deputy Pike limped when the weather turned. A thorn Kane had never plucked, only because you couldn't arrest a man for a grin that never reached his eyes. What jar, Sora? She mimed unscrewing a lid. Smelled like rotten eggs. He fed the dog a biscuit, rubbed the dog's mouth with black mud. The dog shook and cried. The boy said the man was helping. The man smiled slow. Kane's jaw set. Black mud. Powder paste, binding grains to teeth. Train a good dog to fetch, and teach its mouth to strike a match. You didn't need a fuse man when you could make the fuse come to you. Sora's gaze held his. The boy wore a red ribbon on his wrist. Her voice thinned. He wore it yesterday, not today. Kane slid 2 cartridges into his shirt pocket, then the dog's copper loop. He lifted his hat from the peg. Doc, stitch that mouth closed. Keep it here. If anyone asks, say consumption took the animal, and lock this door. Consumption? Folks don't argue with the grave. He stepped back into heat. The square had not cooled. Rumor was a windmill. It turned no matter what the sky did. As he crossed to the abandoned courthouse, faces stepped aside reluctantly, parting like a herd that hadn't decided whether to run or trample. Near the watering trough, Deputy Pike leaned, boot heel carving lazy circles in dust. Hell of a morning, Sheriff. Pike's smile flashed brief and empty. Terrible cruelty, shooting a pet. Kane's eyes did not leave Pike's limp. Cruelty would have been letting it finish the job. Pike's grin twitched. You saying there was a job? I'm saying... Kane's hand lifted, spinning the badge once in the sun. The law's got questions for anyone seen near the old courthouse with jars. The deputy's gaze slipped a fraction. West. To the courthouse, skeleton. It was the blink of a snake-flicking scent. He pushed off the trough. You hunting ghosts, Sheriff? Maybe. Careful. Sometimes ghosts pull you under. Law ain't always justice, Kane said softly, but justice rides with me. Pike's laugh was a shade too loud. Tomorrow's hearing will fix the town. A clean hanging sets nerves right. He tipped his hat and limped away. Kane watched him go. The gallows creaked, empty ropes swaying in a wind nobody felt. He crossed to the courthouse. Inside, sun fell through ribs of broken rafters, painting ladders of light across cracked benches, and a judge's dais gnawed by termites. A dead gavel lay on the floor, its head split open. In the corner, under a litter of rotted casework, Kane found the hatch to the cellar. He knelt, pressed ear to plank, silence and damp. Then, Barely there, the small strangled hiccup of a child trying not to let the world hear him cry. He lifted the plank. The cellar breathed cold. The smell hit first, saltpeter and damp wood laced with mouse droppings. He struck a match and let the flame lean down into the hole. Light found keg crowns, X's charcoaled on staves. 1, 2, 10, 20. Fuses coiled like sleeping snakes. Someone had laid them with care. He lowered himself into the dark. Beneath his boots, straw crunched. He let the match wander until it found a wrist tied to a post. A red ribbon cut a bright line through grime. The boy's eyes flared wide as stars. A rag stuffed his mouth. Kane crouched, touched finger to lip, then cut the gag and rope in a single, long slice. "You Eli Reed?" he whispered. The boy nodded, throat working. My dog." Kane's jaw ached. "I know." There was no time for the whole truth. There never was. "Can you walk?" The boy squeezed eyes tight, swallowed, nodded again. Kane set the match in a crack between stones and pulled a second from his pocket. He traced the fuse path back to a hole bored up through floorboards beneath the gallows. He measured the reach. A dog's leap and a bite away. A scuff above. Boards murmured with weight. "Drop the iron, Sheriff." The voice came crisp as sheeted paper tearing. Not pike, smoother, cultured. Railroad money lacing the vowels. Kane let his hand fall away from the Colt and raised both palms to the dark. A second match hissed. He lifted it, letting the light paint the face at the lip of the hatch. Calder Fitch, the railroad superintendent, knelt there in a dove-gray coat, city-clean boots hooked safe on rafters. He had a derringer leveled neat as a spoon at a dinner table. Behind him, shadows shifted. Men with long guns who knew payroll days and how to skin towns. Pinkerton types. Authority without local ballots. Law stamped on tin star you bought back east. Fitch smiled the way fine china smiles. Brittle, expensive. Marshall Pike overreaches. He thinks like a ranch hand. I prefer economies. His gaze flicked to the kegs, to the boy. "You see the problem. The gallows burns tomorrow at noon. Quite a spectacle. Folks spooked. Land values crater. We buy lots for pennies, and the railroad brings cents back. Eventually." Kane stood very still, feeling the boy's small breath shake against his leg. "You strapped a match to a child's dog." His words scraped out like gravel. Fitch's mouth tipped, almost tender. "A town is just a herd, Sheriff. Sometimes it won't turn until you fire a gun into the dust." Kane let silence thicken until the room could feel how much it weighed. "You expect me to climb out, leave the boy, and pretend I never saw this? I expect you to choose whether your badge is galvanized tin or solid silver." Fitch's eyes gleamed. "You drag that child into daylight and tell your story. You start a war you can't stop. Pinkertons, territorial courts, chambers of commerce. You'll hang before your gallows burns. Or," he gestured with the little gun, "you walk away. We light our lesson. No one blames you. You keep your office. Your town grows. Progress." Period dust motes wheeled in the lamplight, turning like snow in a glass toy. Kane felt the badge in his pocket like ice. He knew this road. Men in suits, law in their breast pocket, ledger books heavier than Bibles. The last time he'd trusted a man like this, he'd buried his wife and carried his boy to a grave he still wouldn't visit at noon. He looked down at Eli's ribboned wrist and the line of fuse snaking toward the square. His voice fell to a thread. Untie your black rope from my town. Make me, Fitch said pleasantly. But do it slow, Sheriff. My men are nervous. Nervous men trip matches. From outside, faint through floor and earth, the town clock began to toll the hour. Each bell struck like a hoofbeat on his spine. Kane smiled without warmth and let his badge drop, silver chiming once on the stone. You're right about one thing, he said. This herd's about to turn. The derringer clicked back a notch. From the square, a scream knifed the morning, high, ragged, many-voiced at once, the sound of people seeing something they weren't meant to see. Sora. Then the smell hit. A thread of smoke snaking down through the hatch, thin as a hair, and Kane realized a fuse had already been lit. But not here, which meant someone had moved the powder, or the gallows. He grabbed the boy as a shadow fell across the hatch and a boot scraped plank. The derringer steadied on his chest. Step away, Sheriff, Fitch said, gentle as a lullaby. Time's up. By midday, the heat pressed down like a hand over a mouth, smothering every breath in Dry Creek. Wind carried grit low along the boardwalks, peppering boots and hems, stinging eyes already red from a morning spent shouting. Sheriff Kane stood alone in the square, where the first shot had cracked 2 days ago. One bullet, one dog, one silence so complete, even the flies had paused mid-circle. Now there was no silence. Rumor had teeth, and it fed. Blue was a good dog, someone cried from the crowd, a thin voice like a bowstring. You ain't fit to wear that star. Kane's silver badge spun once between his fingers and flashed, then lay flat again on his duster. He kept his hands loose, his colt low and latched. A boy sobbed against his mother's skirts, thumb sunk in his mouth, eyes swollen. Widow Daly, hair pinned too tight and hat as black as her dress, watched Kane with the steady, venomous gaze of a woman who had found a shape for her grief. Let the law speak, said Mayor Hollis from the hotel steps. He puffed his chest until the buttons complained. A dog dying ain't a felony, but the manner o' it, before women and children. Law ain't always justice, Kane said, voice flat as planks. Dust hissed across the square. But justice rides with me. That line always changed a room. Today, it changed the sky. The heat seemed to lift. Murmurs took a step back. Then Deputy Rowan Crane broke from the mass like a splinter under skin, hat pushed to his brow, jaw bristled, eyes too bright. You expect us to swallow that again? Crane barked. Ain't no justice in shooting a harmless cur that never bit no one. He planted a boot on the trough and pointed, not at Kane's chest, but at his badge. You wear that silver like a mirror to your sins. Kane's gaze slid to Crane's boots. Clay dust clung to the heels, red as rust. The same red grit he'd scraped from the inside seam of the dog's collar last night in the lonely light of his office lamp, after prying the stitching loose to find the small brass cap stuffed within. Blasting cap. Quarry clay. A tremor had passed through him then, quick and private. He saw again the way Blue had run that day, not at folks, but past them, head low, belly skimming the dust, a black ribbon blinking at his throat, heading straight toward the scaffold lumber stacked under the gallows, the same lumber the railroad foreman had insisted be stored for town improvements. If Blue had reached those crates and nosed the right slat, if a cap had met a friction line tucked in the wood. Kane had pictured the square in splinters, children in ribbons. He'd buried the cap in his desk. He hadn't told a soul. Couldn't. The note he'd found under his cell door after midnight One line in a slow child's hand still stung his pocket. "Speak, and she dies." The girl's braid, described in the note, was exacting, raven dark, copper bead, one string frayed. The bead belonged to Lark, the Apache child who swept the jail steps and sang to the drunk tank when the nights were bad. Someone had taken her after dusk. "Sheriff," came the mayor again, "we've convened a citizen's review in the meeting hall. Your presence is required." Kane looked at the hall, then passed it to the old courthouse, shuttered and sun-bleached, its bell silent, pigeon lime whitening the cornice. Abandoned 2 summers ago, when the railroad money built a shiny clapboard for paper justice. The old one still smelled of rope and old spit, a room where truth had been dragged in by its hair more than once. "Hold your review," he said. "I've got a jail to keep." A bottle shattered. "No, you got a jail to burn," a miner yelled. More voices, hot breath mixing with alkali dust, rose like a brush fire climbing a dry slope. Someone produced ropes. Someone else, he heard the metal scream, yanked a wagon by its tongue into the square. 2 kegs lashed in back, black stencils on the oak reading nails, though everyone with a nose smelled saltpeter. Crane watched Kane watching, licking his canines with the tip of his tongue. Matches rattled in Crane's vest pocket like a tiny drum. Inside the jailhouse, air was cooler, and the damp stone under the front window leaked a dark bruise from last winter's snow. Kane closed the door, turned the key, and stood alone with the quiet. He could have barred the windows, dragged the desk into a brace, prepared for a siege. Instead, he drew out the collar scrap he had hidden, smelled powder ghosts in the leather, and laid it on the blotter like a snakeskin. The blast cap ticked against the wood when he set it down. No sound, really. Just memory. He took a breath that tasted of old iron and ledger dust, and he did the only thing that might buy a child time. He unpinned his silver star, tucked it in the drawer beside the cap, and left his Colt there with it. When he stepped back onto the street, his hands were open. "Rowan," he called, voice carrying clean down the street. "You want me? Come take me. But this town don't need to bleed for it." For a heartbeat, Crane looked startled. Just a flicker. Then pleasure smoothed him. "Hear that, neighbors? He quits his own badge." "I don't quit," Kane said. "I choose." He walked into the press of bodies until shirts brushed his coat, and the stink of salt sweat and lye soap filled his nose. "I choose the girl that ain't here to speak." The widow stiffened. "What girl?" Kane met the mayor's eye. "You want justice? Walk with me to the schoolhouse and count heads." They didn't move. The wind tugged a prayer ribbon from the awning and sent it skittering along the dirt like a panicked lizard. Crane's hand slid inside his vest. Kane saw the matchbox again, saw red clay on the deputy's boots, saw, too, the faint scar at Crane's wrist from an old fuse burn, thin and white as chalk. His mind clicked like handcuffs. Red quarry clay, railroad lumber, an abandoned courthouse with a bell rope that had burned smooth in his hand the week prior when he'd tested it. A bell rope replaced recently, as if someone planned to use it. "Marshal's orders," Crane said too loudly, acting territorial authority while Judge Lyle rides circuit. "We'll convene in the old courthouse." He smiled at the choice, where the rope remembers. The crowd liked the sound of that. It scratched an itch. They surged, loud, the words forming before the thought. Gallows, gallows. The bell of the new clapboard hall refused to ring when Hollis tugged it. The old courthouse bell, a deeper iron voice, answered from its tower, once then once again, echoing down Main like a summons. Crane's men, 3 he'd hired from the quarry last week, fell into flanking positions, rifles cradled, hats low, authority enough for an afternoon. Kane let himself be pulled, shouldered, swallowed into the river of anger. He walked, because to resist now would spill blood. The plank walk shivered under boots. He felt the ghost weight of his Colt, left in the drawer like a missing tooth you can't help tonguing. They reached the courthouse. The door's hinges screamed. Cool shadow breathed out, smelling of old paper and sour rope and a sweetness he couldn't place. Molasses? No, glue. Freshly glued crates tucked under the benches, each stamped nails, each rim darkened with a chalky residue. His neck prickled. Up there. Crane pointed at the dais where the judge's chair rotted with dignity. Someone, Crane surely, had erected a short-frame gallows beneath the old bell rope. The noose dangled in the lamplight and swayed like a slow pendulum, brushing the back of the chair as if whispering to it. The murmur of 60 people filled the chamber, a hive sound, punctured by the occasional scrape of a chair leg. Sentence first, then trial, a voice called. Laughter, mean and nervous. Bring the rope, Crane ordered, and when 2 men stepped forward, Kane raised his palms. You hang me, you hang the truth with me. He swept his gaze across familiar faces. Blacksmith Darrow, who'd hammered his spur rowels. The stable girl Eliza, with freckles like spilled cinnamon, mouth thin with fear. You think that dog ran at you? He ran past you. He ran to something. Ask yourselves who set a path for him. Silence puddled. Then the widow's son, a little thing with hair like wheat straw, tugged free of his mother and held up something small he'd fished from his pocket. A ribbon, blackened along one edge as if it had kissed flame. His voice carried in the gut-punched hush. Mr. Crane told us to tie this to blue when the bell rang. The boy said it meant it was time. Every breath in the room changed temperature. Crane moved faster than thought, snatching the ribbon out of the boy's hand with a smile the crowd couldn't see. Only Kane could. His temper wanted to move his fists. His mind made him breathe. Enough, Crane said brightly, eyes never leaving Kane. Let's get to it. Kane climbed the 3 steps of his own will. As the coarse rope grazed his throat, he looked up into the rafters, squinting past beams at the dark mouth of the bell. A thin line dropped from its lip and disappeared into the wall. Not hemp. Twine. New. Lead line for a fuse. The sweetness he'd smelled wasn't glue. It was glycerin masked with molasses, the quarryman's trick to steady nitro. The crates beneath the benches weren't nails. He pitched his voice only to the rail where Mayor Hollis and 2 older men stood, sober enough to comprehend. You light that bell, he said softly. You'll send this whole room to God. Hollis followed Kane's eyes to the line. The mayor's jaw slackened, color draining like a tipped ink pot. His fingers tightened on the rail until the knuckles went white. Rowan, Hollis croaked. What in heaven's name? Don't listen. Crane lifted the matchbox, thumb trembling with the thrill of it. He's buying time. Kane felt the rope settle, scratch at the scar along his neck. He thought of Lark's copper bead and the way she hummed off-key, and his own wife and son swinging slow in a sun he could never forget. He thought of the badge in the drawer and the cap beside it. He made his choice, and it felt like breaking and like keeping a promise at once. Mayor, he said, loud now, the way you talk to a skittish horse. Cut me down, and you get your trial. Leave me up, and you get a funeral for 60. Hollis wavered. The crowd shifted on their boots. Crane struck the match. The scrape was a whisper, but it sounded like thunder. Flame bloomed tiny and wicked, and he lifted it toward the twine, disappearing into the plaster. Outside, a single scream rose in the street, the high, sharp blade of a child's cry, and a small figure staggered into the doorway, hair unbound, copper bead flashing. Lark. Her lips were split. Her hands were tied. She looked right at Kane, then at Crane's burning match, and whispered in a voice like dry leaves, "They said the bell would hide the fire." The match touched twine. It hissed like a snake waking. The fuse began to run along the wall, quick as a rumor, and the bell over their heads began, very softly, to ring. Marshal Ezra Pike rode in at sundown, dust haloing his hat brim like a bad omen. His coat was too fine for the territory, brass star polished bright as a sermon lamp. He reined up in the square where Kane's shot had cracked 2 days earlier, where chalk still ghosted the cobbles around the dog's body. Folks gathered because folks always did when a man spoke with a badge and a promise. The evening smelled of horse sweat and spilled beer. The sky burned copper, the kind of light that made faces look carved from worry. Pike dismounted slow, let the town see his easy smile and pistol butt. "Evening, Dry Creek," he called, voice carrying neat as a courthouse bell. "I hear your sheriff's gone soft in the head or hard in the heart. Either way, you deserve better." Kane watched from the jailhouse stoop, duster collar up against the wind. His silver badge turned once between scarred fingers, a habit that felt like prayer and warning. He tasted sulfur again, faint as memory, how it had hit him in the square before the shot, that breath of matches and mining powder caught in a dog's fur. The sound of the crowd swelled, mutters, a child's sniffle, someone spitting into the dust. Pike snapped a broadsheet and nailed it to the livery post with a tap that sounded like a nail in a coffin. Recall meeting, citizens committee, inquiry into lawless conduct. Words marched in black ink like soldiers. He let the hammer hang. "You all saw it," he said, turning slow to catch every face. "Good animal, named Rook, gunned down for nothing. Ask the boy who owned him." A gaunt kid, with hair like straw, stepped forward, hat twisting in his hands. His eyes shone wet in the low light. Kane knew him. Jesse Weaver, swept floors at the barber. The boy swallowed. "He come to me most nights," Jesse said, voice small. "I whistled him to the back alley, gave him scraps. Sheriff shot him afore he even—" "Enough," someone shouted. "Hang him for it then." The square breathed sharper, meaner. Kane didn't move. Another breath of sulfur lifted from the dynamite stains he alone had smelled that day. And the other thing, a traced stitch line beneath the dog's matted belly, a thing only a soldier's eye noticed. He hadn't told the town, couldn't tell them without naming the one who'd warned him. Tala, the quiet Apache girl who sold willow bark tea at the edge of market days, who had stood inside the tide of bodies, with fear tucked behind her eyes, and said without moving her lips, "They will send a dog with fire." He'd seen the coil of fuse pressed flat along the strap, the oily glint under fur when the wind turned. He'd put one bullet where it had to go. "Sheriff," Pike said at last, all honey and rope, "the people have questions. Will you answer 'em like a man of law, or hide behind your door?" Kane stepped off the stoop. Boots whispered in the dust. He walked into the evening like a man choosing to be seen. The Colt's pearl grip kissed his palm as he adjusted the belt. He didn't touch the gun otherwise. "Question's wrong," he said, voice low, even. "Ask why someone put a fuse on a dog and sent it where women and children stood." A ripple went through the crowd. Someone laughed too loud. Pike made a pitying face. Hear that? Guilt will spin any tale. Folks, I served 3 territories. Ain't no jury west of Abilene buys a yarn like that. Boy says the animal came gentle for scraps. That sounds like a family dog, not a devil bomb. Deputy Virgil Mott, broad-shouldered and butter-weak, drifted to Pike's side. Kane caught the deputy's eyes and read the bargain already signed there. Mott cleared his throat. Sheriff's been off, Marshal. Drinking late. Keeps to himself. Maybe grief's got him twisted again. A few heads bobbed. Betrayal was always smoother when it wore concern. Heat pressed behind Kane's eyes. Not rage, not yet, but the old ache that sharpened everything cruel. He saw his wife's grave under cottonwoods, his boy's calfskin boots still by the door the night before they died. He tasted smoke and iron. "Virgil," he said, plain, "you know what you're doing?" Mott looked away. "I'm doing what the town needs." "Law ain't always justice," Kane murmured, the words like a bell tolling deep inside him. He didn't finish the rest. Not yet. Not to men who'd already picked which story felt better in their mouths. Pike raised a hand. "Friends, there's a process. The jailhouse is a public building. So's the old courthouse platform. We'll hold our inquiry at dawn. Till then, this town deserves safety. I'll relieve Sheriff Kane of his duties for the night." 2 of Pike's men, trim mustaches, shirts cut like Easterners, stepped toward Kane with chains. The crowd leaned in the way a field leans before wind. Kane could break them. He saw the angles, a step inside the nearest man's reach, elbow to throat, Colt clearing leather before anyone remembered to breathe. He also saw the faces behind. Jessie's pinched grief, Mrs. Abernathy's little girl sucking her knuckles, old men with hands that shook because the past never stopped shaking them. If he drew here, blood would decorate the cobbles before the stars lifted. And Tala. She'd be dead before morning, a scapegoat, snatched by Pike's kind and turned into proof. Kane lifted his arms. Steel tasted the air as manacles closed. The silver badge spun one last time and fell still against his breast. They locked him in his own cell. The key sang against the ring, and the jail's stone held the day's heat like a living thing. Pike's men dragged a makeshift gallows scaffold to the courthouse steps across the square. 2 sawhorses, a beam, rope that flashed pale as bone in lantern light. The town watched the carpentry as if it were theater. Mott stood at the desk, pretending to inventory ledgers. He didn't meet Kane's eyes. "Virgil," Kane said, quiet. "Go home." Mott stiffened. "You ain't sheriff tonight. Go home anyway." A shadow filled the barred window. A small hand slid a folded strip of leather inside and was gone. Kane palmed it quick. Rook's collar. He worked his thumb under the inner seam and felt what the stitching had hidden. A flat twist of fuse head cut and glued, charred at one end where fire had kissed it and run. His chest tightened. He could show it, prove the lie, if Pike let him. If Pike didn't claim he'd planted it himself. Telling it meant saying who'd told him to look. He set the collar beneath his boot heel and didn't crush it. Not yet. Evidence had to be alive when Justice finally wanted it. Torches bloomed outside like eyes opening. Voices melted into one roar, the town at fever heat. Pike climbed the courthouse steps and raised both arms. "We keep order here," he declared. "Not the rule of a single man and his bad temper. At dawn, we ask our questions. Till then, I say we keep a watch, 2 men to every corner, and if our former sheriff attempts escape, he let the paws dangle like a noose. We shall know what to do. String him now, someone yelled. Pike smiled a little. We are not outlaws. Then softer to his men, double the watch. The night grew mean around the edges. A dust devil wandered the square and died at the gallows' feet. In his cell, Kane leaned back, hands resting on his thighs, as if he had all the time in the world. He shut his eyes and listened harder than most folks could bear. Boots over boards, a horse stamping, the thin cry of a baby 3 doors away, the telltale scrape of wood where it shouldn't scrape at this hour. The livery. A crate moved. He stood, let his breath go long and slow. Mott. What? Get Pike, now. Mott pretended to write. Go to sleep, Kane. Virgil, listen to the floor. Silence drew tight. Through it came that scrape again. Wood against wood, careful, wicked. Mott swallowed. Fear had a taste. Could be a rat. Big rat, Kane said. One that carries rifles. Pike appeared at the door with a lantern, light cutting his face into halves. Saint and devil. What's your claim now, Sheriff? You brought something with you, Kane said. Crates marked feed, inside, stamped rifles and powder. You'll set him in the livery, light a panic, lay it on me. Unstable sheriff burns half the town. Then you take my badge proper in the morning. Pike's smile thinned. You should write dime novels. A dog barked twice out back. High, excited, the exact sharp pattern Kane had heard before the square went quiet 2 days ago. A whistle answered, 3 notes, quick and mean. Kane's blood ran cold, his head turned by instinct toward the alley mouth beyond the jail. Lantern light quivered. Hear that? He asked gently. Pike did. His hand twitched toward his gun. Pride kept it from finishing the trip. Kane stepped closer to the bars. You said Jesse whistled that dog for scraps. That there ain't Jesse's whistle. Outside, shadows moved. A shape slid low along the fence line. Another dog, smaller, ribs like fingers under skin. Something dark cinched its belly. The crowd didn't see it yet. They were watching Pike, not the knight that had learned how to crawl. Kane felt his choice walk toward him across that yard. Law, rope, pride, crowd, or the truth set loose with fire under its skin. He lifted his voice so every soul could hear. Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me. Heads turned. That saved half a second, and maybe the town. The dog broke into the lantern light, eyes shining wet and holy, a fused tail tucked against its belly. It ran straight for the courthouse steps, where the new-built beam threw a long black cross on the square. Kane drew. The second dog broke from the alley like a ghost of the first, ribs tight under hide, eyes wet with trust. Oilskin glinted dark against its belly. The new-built beam on the courthouse steps cast a black crucifix across the square, and the animal ran straight for the center of it. Kane drew from his boot, 2-shot Derringer, steel-cold as creek water, and fired through the jail bars. The crack slapped off clapboards. The dog yelped, stumbled, then kept coming. The second shot took the strap, not the heart. The oilskin bundle tore, hissing like a snake. A thin almond reek crawled out, wrong and sweet. Rags, vinegar. Doc Avery bellowed, already moving. Sister Emmeline was faster. She flung a wet apron over the sputtering mess and shoved the dog down with both hands, whispering, "Sorry, sorry," as if prayer could be a bandage. The hissing died to a spit. The animal went still, a last tremor running its length like wind through grass. The square, mid-roar a heartbeat earlier, froze, stupid with fear. Marshal Pike's smile slipped. Deputy Rowan Crane's matchbox clicked shut in his palm. From his cell, hands black with powder, Kane spoke, so they'd all hear. That's twice they sent fire on 4 legs. Twice I stopped it. Pike recovered quick, or staged it, Sheriff, to dress your sin in hero's clothes. His voice was honey again, and rope. Either way, you're under guard. Dawn brings inquiry. Kane stared at the derringer, empty now, 2 mouths quiet. The bars laced cold shadows across his shirt. He could sit and let process grind as slow as cattle through mud. He could hope truth beat the men who wore the law like a rented coat. Or he could choose law or justice. He set the little gun down. "Virgil," he said. Deputy Virgil Mott flinched where he pretended to tally ledgers. He didn't look up. "Ain't my name tonight? It's your soul tonight." Kane's voice softened. "Fetch Doc's vinegar jar. Show it to the square." Mott hesitated. Then habit, good habit, built across years of hard days, moved his boots. In a minute he stood in the doorway with the jar Doc Avery had sealed that morning. Oilskin packet, floating in a pickled halo, powder paste, clinging like rot to the glass. People leaned in without meaning to. Almond stung their eyes. Pike laughed too loud. "Tricks. He can pickle any old rag and call it proof." Doc's white mustache bristled. "Almond scent means cyanide, kin. Enough of this turned loose would lay your children down. That dog was a walking fuse. So was the first." The murmur changed shape. Sounded more like thinking, less like thirst. Crane's hand slid toward his vest again. Matches whispered inside. Anxiety made them chatter. Kane turned his wrists, watched the cuffs bite. "Mayor Boone," he called, picking a name the town still believed in more than it believed in itself. The mayor's face surfaced from the crowd, slick with sweat. "You want the truth? You'll have to let me fetch it. The men who rigged this fire still breathe our air." Boone swallowed. His gaze jumped to Pike. Pike spread his hands. "Order, Mr. Mayor. No sheriff breaks his own cell. The court meets in the morning." Kane shut his eyes for one long breath and saw the things he always saw when choice felt like a cliff. His wife's hair in sunlight, his boy's boots at the door, a copper bead glinting in a little Apache girl's braid. Sora, the schoolchildren called Lark. He saw rope and ledger books. He saw the badge he'd spun between his fingers when his temper wanted a target, and the nights he'd sat alone with whiskey and kept the town steady because someone had to. He opened his eyes and made his choice. "Virgil," he said again, quiet, almost kind. "Take a walk, 30 heartbeats, then come back and arrest me if you're still sure." Mott stared at him for a strangled second. Then the deputy did the bravest thing a weak man can do. He walked. Kane stepped back, drew his knee high, and kicked the barred lock where the bolt's ears kissed wood. Once, twice, the third blow broke the jam. The door stuttered, then gave. He was in the square before half the town remembered to shout. Pike's hand went to his gun. Kane's didn't. "You yank iron, Marshal," he said, "and you'll spook the men holding the real matches." "Stand down," Pike barked, but the timbre was wrong. He heard himself and heard the crack in it. "By authority of the railroad?" Kane asked, voice calm as a well. "Or its money?" He pointed with his chin, up, to the clapboard balcony above the saloon. Calder Fitch stood there in dove gray, Pinkertons ghosting his shoulders. A lamp hung from his hand, flame steady in the windless heat. He smiled like a banker looking at a calf he'd already bought. "Sheriff," he called. "Afternoon." Heads turned, and the square stitched the name to the suit. Fitch let them. "My men came to protect investment. Commerce requires calm. Your performance endangers that." Kane moved to where everyone could see him, and the thing in his eyes no badge made or unmade. "You lined the courthouse with kegs and twine. You taught a dog to carry fire. You took a child to keep my mouth shut." Fitch's mouth tipped, almost tender. An allegation only. The territory loves a bold story almost as much as it loves progress. On cue, Crane shouted, "Hear him spin. He's ready to hang a good man because he misfired once." Good man. Kane watched Crane's red clay boots. He pictured the fuse burn scar at the deputy's wrist, pale as chalk. "How's your limp, Rowan?" he asked into the crowd. "Quarry must have been rough this week." Crane flinched, quick as a lizard. The crowd caught it. Lincoln nails are easier to pull than a lie once the head shows. Doc Avery didn't wait for permission. He climbed 2 steps of the courthouse and held the vinegar jar high. "Powder, primer, paste. I've seen hell come in neater jars, but not many." He pointed to the dog Sister Ameline had smothered. "You all love dogs. They killed 2 to kill your children." A hush fell. It had the sound of a room deciding which way it would tip. Kane reached inside his duster and took out the silver badge. He looked at its scuffs, the places where blood and rain had polished it smooth, and he counted things. He could set it back on his chest and wait for dawn and the slow, sour gears of a hearing steered by men like Pike and Fitch. Or he could give the town something it understood, a choice made loud and in the open. He closed his fist on the badge until its points bit. When he spoke, he put the words on the square like a stake. "Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me. If I'm wrong, lock me again. If I'm right, stand with me long enough to cut the right rope." He didn't wait for their answer. He moved. Across the street, behind the livery, wood-scraped wood. The same careful sound he'd heard from the cell. The sound of wicked patience. He ran on the balls of his feet, hat brim low, air hot in his throat. The alley smelled of horse and old hay, and the edge of something chemical trying to act like molasses. He rounded the corner and found a line of twine drawn from the livery wall into the courthouse crawl space. Tar brushed over it to hide the color. In the half-shade knelt a small figure, wrists bound, braid frayed. Sora, Lark to the schoolhouse, looked up at him through a mask of dust. "They said if I cried." She whispered, lips cracked. They'd light it faster. Kane's chest hurt. "You did good." He sliced the cords, pulled her behind him, felt her small breath on his coat. He wanted to be gentle. He had no time. The twine ran under the courthouse like a vein to a heart. Bootsteps skittered. Crane lunged from the shadow, match already flaring. His eyes were wide, bright with a boy's pleasure at breaking things. "You don't decide for this town anymore," he hissed. Kane hit him before the speech finished. Not pretty. Fast. Elbow to wrist, wrist to plank, a grind of bone. The match fell, rolled, kissed grit, died. Crane snarled and clawed for a second one. Kane's fist found his throat and pressed his history there, every choice that had made him a sheriff. Instead of a wolf, Crane gagged and went limp. Kane didn't relish it. He didn't apologize either. "Take her," he snapped, as Doc Avery and Mayor Boone arrived at a stagger, faces pale. Boone gathered the girl like something breakable. Doc put his foot hard on the twine. "Cut it," the mayor gasped. Kane shook his head. "Slow. If there's nitro under there, we don't jolt it. Wet rags. Keep it cold." Behind them, the square seethed, and then parted as Ezra Pike shouldered through, pistol out, lantern light painting him jaundiced. "Sheriff Kane," he barked, "drop that knife and surrender yourself. That's an order." Kane didn't turn. "You sure you want to be on the wrong side of this twice in one day, Marshal?" He could feel the town listening. "Fitch buys your ink and your whiskey. Don't let him buy your gallows, too." Pike's breath hitched just enough to be human. He lifted the pistol higher to hide it. Above them on the balcony, Fitch made a small show of being bored. He lifted his lamp and stepped to the stair. "This grows tedious," he said in that city-schooled voice. "Gentlemen, Dry Creek needs a lesson in obedience." He tipped the lamp toward a tarred rope that vanished into the eaves. Another line. The flame licked the pitch. Fire took, hungry and bright, and began to run toward the courthouse roof, where crates hid inside the dark, like sleeping oxen. Pike swore. Doc Avery swore louder. Kane looked at the tar rope, at the children pressed to their mothers' skirts, at the old men who'd taught him to mend wire and count clouds. He looked at the badge in his fist and understood the only truth that mattered, that a piece of silver didn't make the choice. A man did. He threw the star into the dirt and ran. Boots hammered planks. The flame climbed quick as a rumor. He took the steps 2 and 3 at a time, shoulders grazing the posts, heat lapping his face like a fever. Fitch saw him and smiled wider, because men like Fitch were never afraid, until gravity remembered their names. Kane left the rail, launching himself into the space between balcony and rope. The air smelled of pitch and hot iron. He hit the line hard with his forearm, and fire kissed his sleeve and bit. Pain flashed white and sharp. He grunted and wrapped the rope, bearing his weight, trying to bend the burning arc away from the eaves. Below, Sora, Lark, screamed his name, small and fierce. Across the square, Pike's pistol came up. Dawson's rifles came up. A dozen hearts decided, and Calder Fitch's little derringer winked once in the light. The shot went off. Everything slowed, the flame chewing tar, the bell above beginning to tremble, the star he'd thrown winking in the dust like a fallen moon. Kane felt the bullet's wind pass his cheek and didn't know whose gun had spoken. The rope hissed, split, and fire fell. By dusk, the gallows threw a long black cross across the square. Wind-worried prayer flags from a burial the town never finished, and grit ticked against the windows of the courthouse like fingernails on a coffin lid. Sheriff Kane stood on the steps of the jailhouse with his duster open and the day's dust in the crease of his scar. His badge rested in his palm, spinning slow. The townsfolk gathered in a ring, merchants with folded arms, mothers clutching little ones, men with hands on belts, but not yet on iron. And fronting them all, Territorial Marshal Harlan Voss smiled the way a man smiles after he's already bought the rope. "Evening, Sheriff," Voss called, his voice rich as whiskey and twice as dangerous. "You're going to hand over the Apache girl and the murderer of my dog, or we take both from your jail and call it the people's will." Behind Kane, in a narrow cell that smelled of iron and lye, the Apache girl, Tala, watched through the bars, her dark hair tied back with a strip of muslin. She had seen him shoot the dog that morning. She had also seen what the others hadn't: the scorched strap cinched around the animal's belly, the oiled rag and the sputtering fuse hidden under fur. It was a bomb, she had whispered, voice steady even as the town howled. "You saved them," Now her hands gripped the bars so tight, her knuckles went white. Kane let the badge spin to stillness and closed his fingers on it. "Law says the witness stays in my protection," he said, eyes on Voss. "Law says you don't bring a mob to my door." Voss's smile never reached his eyes. He tipped his hat toward the gallows as if showing off a parlor chair. "Law says a lot of things. Folks here remember a dog named Dusty, shot down in daylight. They remember a child's tears. They don't remember your excuses." A boy stepped forward, Milo, all elbows and dust, leash dangling empty. He stared at Kane like a boy stares at thunder that picked a man instead of a tree. "Why'd you kill him?" he asked, voice raw. Kane swallowed the sand in his throat. "Because someone turned him into a fire," he said. He reached into his coat and held up a charred brass buckle and a length of blackened strap. The wind licked smoke scent from the leather, ghosting the square with proof. "Found these in the alley. There was powder scorched onto his belly. I saw the fuse. I didn't have a second to explain." "Lies," Voss snapped, but he didn't look at the strap. He watched the crowd. He throws scraps to a grieving boy to hide murder. A mutter stirred like brush fire. A few men stepped, just an inch, just enough to test the circle's edge. Kane's voice dropped to something quiet and hard. That fuse was cut. Someone close enough to whistle him under the benches and into the powder kegs stacked by Landry's store. He shifted his gaze to the marshal's gloved hand. "You blow a dog, you blow a street, you blow a witness. That's your kind of bookkeeping, Harlan." Voss showed teeth. Big talk for a man one step from a rope. "Look around you, Kane." The wind shifted, bringing a new smell, kerosene. Kane's head lifted. In the wedge of dusk between the livery and the square, a mottled cur nosed low, dragging a length of twine. Something wagged beneath it, cloth wrapped around a rigid shape, glistening wet. The dog's tail beat, its ears pricked to a sound no one else heard. A whistle. 3 notes, sharp as a knife on a whetstone. Kane didn't think. His colt cleared leather and barked once. The cur folded soundlessly, twine skittering away. A hiss, a guttering ooze of fire, died in the dust 2 feet from the first of Landry's powder barrels. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. No words, no breath. Only the soft tick of cooling metal as the colt settled back into Kane's hand. Then the square erupted. Cries, curses, someone retching at the smell of burned fat. A woman covered the boy's eyes too late. Voss's face tightened, just a hair, then smoothed. "Savage," he spat. "He'll shoot anything that moves now." Kane leveled the colt at Voss's chest. "Law ain't always justice," he said, the words flat as iron. "But justice rides with me." Voss's left shoulder rolled, and Kane saw it. Not fear, calculation. The marshal's right hand hovered not near his pistol, but just behind the gallows post, where a plunger head sat half-hidden beneath a burlap sack. A wet fuse led from it toward a wagon with a tarp thrown careless over its load. Oil bled through the weave. If Voss went down and someone panicked, a footstep could send the handle down on its springs and light the square like sunrise. Irreversible. Kane turned his head an inch, enough to find Deputy Abel Price at the side door of the jail. Price's face was young and clean and scared. "Abel," Kane said, never taking eyes off Voss. "If I fall, you keep that door barred. You don't let them take the girl." Price swallowed. "Yes, Sheriff. You swear it." "I swear it." Kane slid the badge from his palm with his thumb and tucked it into his pocket. No ceremony, no words. The wind riffled the gallows rope. Voss's fingers twitched. "Last chance," Voss drawled. "Give me the girl. You can keep your office. We'll say your hand shook when you shot the dog, and folks will forgive a trembling old lawman, or you die in your doorway with a murderer's name." Kane exhaled, slow. He saw the square as if from 30 feet above, the powder barrels, the plunger, the wagon sweating oil, the boy shaking with an empty leash, Tala's pale knuckles on iron, the badge pressing warm against his ribs. Somewhere, a shutter thumped. A horse stamped. Dust lifted, silver in the last light. He stepped away from the threshold so the shot wouldn't blow into the cell, set his boots square, and spoke without raising his voice. "No." His Colt fired twice. The first round took Voss high in the right forearm, snapping bone and spinning the plunger away from his grasp. The second smashed the plunger head itself, wood and steel jumping in a spray of splinters. Voss screamed and grabbed for his pistol with his left, but Kane was already moving. He crossed the space between them in 4 long strides, knocked the gun aside with his forearm, and drove Voss back into the gallows post so hard the whole structure shivered. The rope above them groaned like an old tree in wind. Hands grabbed at Kane's coat, then fell away as the townsfolk recognized what lay under the wagon tarp. Kegs, their tops tarred, cords braided like snakes. A woman whispered a prayer. Landry, white to the lips, edged forward and kicked the cords free of the wheel spokes with the toe of his boot. Voss panted, blood stringing from his sleeve. "You won't leave here breathing, Kane." "Maybe," Kane said, "but you're done." He spun the marshal and slammed iron cuffs on his wrists against the post, the metal bite echoed by a dozen indrawn breaths. The symbol of law, cold, plain shackles, clinked into place, while the crowd watched the man who'd roused them stand tied like any bummer taken on a Saturday night. The wind lifted the marshal's coat and showed the whistle strung inside, like a keepsake. 3 chipped notes dangled from a braided lanyard. Kane turned, voice carrying. He used dogs as fire and called it grief. "That's the man you followed." Silence rolled out and stayed. A few men put hats back on, shame slow in their hands. The boy Milo looked at the second dog, at the rag bundle oozing oil now crushed in the dust, then at Kane. His mouth opened, closed. When he finally spoke, it was to Voss. "You made Dusty bad." Kane holstered the Colt and reached into his pocket. He took the badge out and set it on the lowest step of the courthouse, the silver star bright against old wood. "Abel," he said, eyes on nobody and everybody, "take the marshal into the cell I kept for him in my head." He looked at the crowd, witnessed him alive, witnessed me surrender. Price's boots sounded hollow as he crossed the square. Hands reached as if to stop him, then fell back. He unlocked the iron door and held it open, Adam's apple working, eyes shining with a fear that had new edges to it, respect mixed in. Kane crossed the last few feet alone, the square parting like a slow tide. He paused on the threshold. Tala stood at the bars, meeting his gaze through iron and shadow. "If you are lost for this," she said softly, her voice the hush before a storm breaks, "know I live because of what you did." The key turned behind him with a sound that rang like a verdict. The square listened to its echo and waited for morning. In the quiet that fell after the chain slid home, Kane felt the old questions move through him like a cold wind down a canyon. He had killed a beloved animal in daylight to stop a street from burning. He had shot a marshal and shattered a plunger to keep children from flying apart, like birds struck mid-flight. He had cuffed a man who wore a federal star to a post tall as a gallows. And then he had walked into his own cell because the badge on his chest meant nothing if his hands weren't willing to bear the weight of choice. Law had rules. Justice had a face. Tonight the rules and the face had stared at each other across a square strewn with kerosene and grief, and he had chosen. Maybe the town would call him murderer. Maybe they would remember the smell of burning fat and forget the cords snaking toward kegs. Maybe Abel Price would keep his oath, and the judge, when he finally rode in, would listen to a boy named Milo and a girl named Tala and a strip of charred leather. Kane sat on the narrow bunk, leaned his head back against cool stone, and let the wind worry the eaves. He saw his wife and son the way they came in dreams, smiling, whole, a life stolen from him by men who hid behind badges and papers. He had sworn then that he would never hide behind the star. Not when it mattered. Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me, he whispered into the dark. Outside, the silver badge lay where he'd left it, catching a last knife of moonlight, as if deciding which man it belonged to now, savior or executioner.